Oh, and we're live. I was going to adjust my screen, but I won't do that now. This is the Oneness Talking Point with Melanie Brockwell. That's me, by the way, in case you didn't know. And this week, we're talking about forgiveness. And there was this quote that I really wanted to bring to the conversation, which I couldn't find, but it goes something like this. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to love unconditionally, or to grow, or whatever you want to put at the end of that sentence. So the concept of forgiveness in that statement is thank you for giving me. So that sense of when we feel slighted becomes a gratitude, an after the fact gratitude. So we see it as a means to an end. And there was another, so while I was looking for that, I also found this video by Oprah about one of her aha moments. Bing, 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 she said. She was pointing to her head, just going, bing, bing, bing. Does everybody get that? Bing, bing, bing. We've all got that different way of expressing what it feels like when we feel like we learn something new, or we feel like we remember something that we know, or we feel like a truth has been revealed. For Oprah, it's an aha and a bing, bing, bing. And so in this short video, she said of the 30,000 people that she'd interviewed, there was this one man that talked about forgiveness. And he said, it was about, I wrote a couple of notes. These are not quotes. This is just me roughly writing as the man was speaking. That forgiveness was about letting go of the past, of our perception, the past we thought we wanted, letting go of that ideal. And when Oprah reiterated it in the way that made sense to her, she said it was about, forgiveness is about giving up the hope that the past can be any different. And then there was a Tony Robbins slide, those Instagram, picture with beautiful font on it that said, forgiveness is a gift you give yourself. Now, that's all fabulous if that makes sense to you. That's all fabulous if the land of separation of us and them, of actions and reactions, of of relationships as things in and of themselves make sense to you. If that's the cosmology and the reality and the experience that you're having, those things feel true and helpful and like medicine. They feel like therapy. They feel like a breath of fresh air, a way of releasing anxieties, senses that, like, I think Deepak Chopra talks about forgiveness, the lack of forgiveness, the need to forgive, as this experience of holding your breath. Correct me if I'm wrong. I might have got mixed up who said what. But it's that sense that it's poisoning you, that inability to forgive, or that need to forgive is poisoning you. And so that very real lived separation experience compels you to find a means to forgive, not excuse, not justify, not even to necessarily accept the person or situation, back into your life, but simply to accept, I guess, its purpose in a way, then for the means to an end people, its purpose is to give you an opportunity to love unconditionally, or to accept what you cannot change, accept that your past is beyond your control, to accept that loving yourself is as much about forgiveness of what you perceive has been done as a slight against you. I'm just wondering if I'm going to close the blinds because they're making a lot of noise. You know, and there's also this sense that forgiveness won't necessarily change the past, but somehow it changes your experience of now and your potential future. So that's all the separation talk, you know, all the aphorisms and therapeutic justifications for forgiveness. In oneness, there's no separation. So even though it feels like you're in a friendship and it looks like there's other people and it seems as if you have been slighted in that very, you know, ping pong universe where things can bounce off one another, the truth of that experience, you're bing, 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 as a person having the oneness experience, is that it's not really about other people at all. And that sense of being slighted is an experience on purpose in and of itself, whether you get a story about it to make sense of how or why, because there is no means to an end in that oneness experience. So accepting the feeling of being slighted in this and every moment for its own sake is the only necessity, is the only focus, is the only need, requirement to satisfy someone having a oneness experience. And it goes a bit further, you know, in the philosophy of that oneness cosmology. And it feels a bit harsh saying it out loud, but in the oneness experience, you don't have the right to forgive. Forgiveness requires that not only that you feel slighted by an other, which is impossible, it also requires that you have all the information. And as an equal and essential, you know, expression of oneness or experience of oneness, you don't have access to all the information. And when you do, there's no sense of form or being slighted or an other. So either way you want to look at it, there's no space for forgiveness. You still have the experiences of being slighted, but you understand those experiences differently than someone who's having an experience of separation, you know, of a ping pong universe where people can have actions and reactions and people are entities in solid fixed forms and they can do things to one another according to the laws of Newtonian physics, you know. So your experience in oneness of being slighted is in this moment as a now process. I'm just thinking there's, you know, even in that separation analogy, you can have experiences beyond that direct linear cause and effect explanation of being slighted. You can have an empathic experience of being slighted, or you can have a karmic experience of being slighted, or you can have a past life memory carried through of being slighted, all in that separation-ness of forgiveness, you know, that morphic field that requires forgiveness. the poison of yet to forgive. And all of those things are beyond that direct linear cause and effect, justifying what the friend did or the boss did or the force majeure kind of cast upon you. Why was I born this way? Why did the universe take away that person that I love? Why did God punish me with XYZ? I'm not diminishing any of those things. All of those things are very real and true and painful and worthwhile and equally sacred to all of the things that I'm talking about for someone having a oneness experience. I'm merely iterating, that sense of difference, those points of the conversation that aren't necessarily being had in, therapy, the pathology of self and culture, in, spiritual relationships with ourselves, with others, with the planet. All of that separation conversation is great for the people that speak that language, who have that experience. But where are we having the conversation for people who are already having the oneness sense of no self, the chariot of Shekinah, where can we have that conversation? Rather than compare the ways that people are being or understanding or expressing or desiring. It's not about the comparison. It's about what's true for you. If you're having the experience that requires forgiveness of a particular kind and you need a method for that, excuse me, then you need a method for that. There's no end of this sentence. There's only the reflection of the truth that's already true for you. So go with the truth that's already true for you. That's the point of these conversations as well. If you feel like you have a reaction to that concept of you do not have the right to forgive, what happens for you when I say that? What truth makes itself visible? What knowing do you have about forgiveness? That's the only thing that really matters in these conversations. It's not education. We're not transforming you into a oneness person. It's whatever's already true for you is the topic of this conversation. So whether we call it forgiveness or allowing, what is the truth that's making itself visible for you when we have that conversation? And there's a lot going on in that self-awareness, and that even if you're having the oneness conversation experience, it doesn't mean that you don't use methodologies. You just don't use them as a means to an end. You don't use them with a concept of a direct linear cause and effect cosmology. So you may be called, inspired, compelled, pulled to use, say, Ho'oponopono. And I never know if I say it the way you're meant to say it. But this is the way it makes sense to me. I'm sorry. Please forgive me. I love you. Thank you. And when I perform the Ho'oponopono, it's not because I've identified a problem or in a relationship or, a poison or whatever that I need to fix. It's generally when I'm having an experience I don't understand, and it's the balloon that floats in front of my face as a suggestion, as an offering. There's no directive in it. It doesn't say you need to do this or you won't get to the next chapter. So it's just an invitation. And I quite enjoy the sensation. And I get a bit of I was going to say light show, but it's more than a light show. It's almost, I get visions while I have that Ho'oponopono process. And I don't need to think about the situation I don't understand while I'm doing it, because I think sometimes you're given the directions to think about the obstacle to where you want to be in the relationship with that person, or think about the hurt that stops you from accepting and loving someone, or think about the mindset that keeps you from prosperity and all your just desserts. Often the instructions with Ho'oponopono that I've come across encourage you to think about, to have that image in your focus when you're performing the ritual. I don't really know what you'd call it. For me, I kind of allow the image to come to me. So if I'm having a situation that I don't quite understand and the bubble of Ho'oponopono floats towards me, I go, great. And so I'll often close my eyes and start to say it, and the focus image will appear to me. It's not something that I put there. It's not something that I need to bring into my awareness. It's something that brings itself. And as that focus image remains in my awareness and I feel the words, which I'm also saying, I get this movie thing that happens. It's like a little bit of memory, little bit of dream, little bit of, angel realms, whatever you want to call them. I don't really identify them so much. I just let them play out. And different parts of my body will kind of move and jilt and jolt, and I'll get temperature changes in different parts of my anatomy, and I'll be like, for people who do Reiki, my body will move into a certain position when I put my hands above someone or a proxy someone. My hands kind of lock into place and I don't feel them anymore, and they'll move to where they need to be and then they'll stop. My arm will just hold itself there for a while. And it's the same thing with the Ho'oponopono ritual, but it's your entire being. So you kind of move and into this and lock, then it kind of locks in and stops there. And I mean, there's no force. It's not like someone's holding you, but at the same time, there is a sense that you don't need to hold yourself in any particular way. You'll be moved into the position that you need to be. And it'll draw a breath into your body, and when it's finished, you'll kind of just get a sense that it's finished. And you won't necessarily move straight away. Like there'll be a lovely at the end that feels like a cloud of joy and love and peace and whatever. It's just a moment of silence at the end, and you can sit there for as long as you want. And then you move on to the next impulse. And you don't, in the oneness experience, you don't get a sense, oh, that's done now, it's all complete, and we've fixed that, and we've cut the cords and healed the past, and that person will ring me and everything will be different, and I've resolved that issue in my life, and that's all cleared, and there's a big black hole that's been removed, or there's a big empty space that's been filled, or I've rebalanced the positive and negative. You don't get that story in the oneness experience. You probably get that story in the separation experience, and it feels you're enamored with the process, with the result, and you get all this evidence that it was worthwhile, and you get this sense that you were on purpose, and now something shifted and changed and transformed, and people are different. You have the power to do all that stuff, and you're no longer powerless over the past that you realized in order to forgive, you had to let go of your power over to change and make it the way you wanted it. So in that separation experience, you're required to have that reality. And in the oneness experience, you're not. I was thinking about it this morning. I'm having some friends do some biofield tuning, and they're fabulous, and I love them, and I'm very grateful. And when we connect after the session, it's a distance thing. When we connect after the session, I want to be able to give them information in their language about what's different. And it came to me this morning, that's almost impossible, because I'm like a child who you can do the Reiki to, and they'll just go out and have their day. They're not aware of the symptoms being there or not being there. They're not aware of sickness. They'll get frustrated if they're hot, and they'll get annoyed if they can't go and play because you've, protecting them because they're not well. And they experience fevers and et cetera, and they don't like throwing up, and, all of that stuff. But in their awareness, they don't call that sickness, and they don't call the absence of those things well-being and health. Like again, this itchy nose. They just have the experience that they're having. And if you sat them down and asked them to articulate the difference, I'm sure they give you the same face that I have when I try and articulate the difference. Even though I appreciate the process, even though I intuitively know it's worthwhile and it's exactly what I'm meant to be doing, I find it difficult to connect a fixed point of here to the definite outcomes of there. I just have the energy I have and feel the joy I feel. Then it's kind of like the difference between someone who goes on holiday and just has a holiday and someone who goes on holiday and takes photos of everything that they do. I'm the person that just goes on holiday and has the holiday. I'm touching the sculptures and the metal railings, and I'm walking down the streets, and I'm eating the food, and I'm watching the people, and I'm listening to the trees and enjoying the spray of the ocean and whatever else is going on. I'm not recording it. I'm not going to get home and scrapbook about my holiday. I'm going to be in my holiday and probably not necessarily remember it in a way that makes it possible to even talk about what happened, because I'm so in love. I'm so enamored. I'm so present. That's what presence is for me. I'm so fascinated and curious and involved with what's going on, that it doesn't feel like an inside outside. It doesn't feel like a holiday that's separate from the rest of my life. I can't say this is January because I'm not storing the world in terms of January, in terms of day and night, in terms of week and weekend. It doesn't make sense like that in oneness. Here, this, wind, itchy nose, the headphones. If someone wants to buy me some new headphones, I'd really love that. Thank you. This is presence, not in that mindfulness as opposed to unmindfulness or non-mindfulness. It's being in love with, being fascinated with, being curious about. And I have the same conversation, that sense of not being able to translate it to people in business as well. For all the wonderful marketing and course making processes, and even the self-help spiritual principles processes, I can't seem to meet people in that place where what's going on is the only thing that's important. Somewhere, people have this sense of, I've got to attach myself to this process or this principle or this financial outcome or this plan, all this transformation and purpose of being on the planet. I can't have any of that on my mind when I'm in love with now. There's no room for it. It feels like I understand its importance to people it's important to. I'm not dismissing any of that. I'm merely saying that being in love with now takes up all of my time and energy and focus, and that's how I'm present. So even when we talk about forgiveness, in the moment that I'm feeling slighted, I'm in love with that moment. I'm enamored with that experience. I'm having it for its own sake. I'm not taking photos of it and judging it and putting it in a file that says, here are all the experiences that I've had where people have let me down, or here are all the experiences that I've had where I didn't get what I wanted, or here are all the experiences that I've had where I had my heart broken. It doesn't store in my storage system. It's just here. And it's not that I have no memory whatsoever of what happened 2 seconds ago. It's just that the avenue to that memory is not in a linear time. It's not in a judgment file. It's not in an assessment storage system. I can't get to it the way that other people seem to be able to get to their memories. It's a very sensory reality. Being in love with the moment in a oneness experience. I don't know, it's just a beautiful thing. And in some ways, I'm really happy to talk about it. It's taken me a while to get comfortable with that idea. See, and even that, I like discomfort. Discomfort is a beautiful thing. I'm in love with the experience of discomfort. It's important, just as important and sacred as all of the other experiences and senses that I have. It's an exploration. I feel discomfort. Ooh, that's interesting. What's going on in there? Not what caused it, how do I get out of it, who's responsible for it. What's going on? What happens in this discomfort thing? I don't know what happened. So the thing that's coming to me is what happens for you when you do a little experiment and when you become aware of it. Don't make it a thing. It's not a test. When you become aware of it, how can you be in love with now? Just see what happens. You know, not trying to convert you to a reality where that's the only experience you have. I'm just getting a little inspirational push to suggest that that's an exploration you might like to endeavor to have, or not. What kind of exploration would you like to have? Why don't you come up with something that makes sense for you? What would you have people explore if you were sitting here having this conversation about forgiveness? What would you suggest? What would you be inspired to talk about that didn't get talked about today? What feels like an important part of the forgiveness conversation that is yet unspoken? Feels like there's a lot of what about the dark side going on. It's funny because I did fleetingly look at something about that yesterday. I spent all day writing my book. Oh, so exciting. And I used to make these candles called Lux Fair, about the bearer of the light. And the language used in that product, in those creative wink days, which was the name of my business back then, could very well be used for the separation experience. I had yet to discover what people meant when they used that language. You know, for me, it was the same language as them, but I had a different experience of it completely. And so these candles were about aspects of self, characteristics, things that we often reject or want to tame or get rid of, transform. Just trying to think if I can remember what one of them was. Okay, I can't really remember, but let's say greed. That wasn't one of them, but let's just say greed. And so the process of the message on the candle, you got a little booklet. And so it allowed you to see that aspect of self in terms of an empowerment. You know, how does it make you who you are in a way that you don't need to reject or change or fix or heal? So if it was greed, you could say greed is part of your inspiration to gather together and collect items and resources because you have a lot of connections and you want to be able to make them available to a lot of people, and you feel like you're the responsible point of distribution. And so then that greed becomes less about what's wrong with you, and it becomes more about seeing the purpose of that aspect or that characteristic in terms of, you know, the acceptable sacred wholeness. And there were lots of them, you know, and that's that tangent of forgiveness. And I think the candles also talked about if you didn't get an opportunity to be that distribution point, it would look like you were this greedy mofo, no good, who just collected like a bowerbird and didn't share. And if people looked at you and didn't see that you were a distribution point, they would make an assumption that the greed was a bad thing. You know, I mean, there's lots of places that you can take that conversation. You can say, well, is greed really greed? You know, greed is generosity in and of itself, seen from a different face of the diamond. But that, you know, that dark side stuff doesn't play out so much in oneness. You know, the experience that I have now and when I was writing in that language is the same. It's just that I didn't know that people felt like they had different, you know, that they weren't whole, that they did feel bounded and separate. I thought that, you know, the play on words with these aspects and forgiveness and wholeness, the dark side, all of that still made sense to me. In oneness, all of that still made sense to me as a fluid, non-self whirlpool shape in the ocean of all that is. You know, I still experienced it that way, even though I talked about all those things. And I think that's another thing about language, is you can't really tell what kind of experience you're having, you know, whether you feel aware of oneness or whether you feel aware of separation or duality, you know, whatever. If separation feels like an insult, you know, find the word that feels comforting, because it's not an accusation. It's just, an articulation of the experience that you're having, of the cosmology that makes sense to you. So we can't kind of diagnose the cosmology that someone's experiencing by the language that they use, because often they don't mean the same thing as the next person who's using the same term. So maybe that's another exploration. What is the experience that you have of the language? What experience are other people having who use the same language or different language to you? Is it the same? How do you know, people? How do you know? Anyway, that feels like enough homework. Do something about this itchy nose. All right. I love you very much. Thank you for watching the Oneness Talking Point with Melanie Brockwell. And if you want to find those biofield tuning people who are just fabulous, go to livingmastermentor.com. Click on Love Your Work. And I think there's a drop-down menu. And one of the things is biofield tuning. And that has their contact details. If you want to book a distance session or just have a chat about learning, because they're connected to Eileen McKissick, who's the biofield tuning lady. And I'm sure they'd love to hear from you. Oh, I can feel my dad watching, so I love you. Just thought I'd mention you, whether you're at the hairdressers or wherever you are. And I'll talk next week. Next week, we talk about wholeness. Oh, so exciting. Okay, in love with my now. I'm going to talk to you next week. Ready? Pressing the button. That's it. This is the end.